Pickle Wheat has finally broken her silence, revealing the 5 people she hated the most in the swamps of Louisiana. To fans, she was the fearless gator hunter, the tough young woman who carried on her family's legacy and stood shoulder to shoulder with Troy Landry himself. But behind that grit and determination, Pickle carried grudges that cut deeper than the swamp waters. So who left scars so painful that trust was shattered forever?
Everyone thought the swamp was one big family built on loyalty and love, but the truth was jealousy, betrayal, and lies. The very people I trusted made me cry, and only I know the things they did to me at night. But now it's time to bring the truth to light.
Today, we reveal the shocking list Pickle never wanted the world to know. And to understand her bitterness, we have to return to where the first cracks began. When Swamp People introduced Pickle Wheat, fans fell in love with her instantly. She wasn't just another cast member, she was tradition, the granddaughter of a long line of hunters who lived and breathed the bayou. At first, Pickle believed in the unity of the swamp. On screen, it looked like everyone was family bound by survival, loyalty, and the hunt. But behind the cameras, rivalries and tensions simmered just beneath the surface. To Pickle, the swamp wasn't always loyalty. Sometimes it was competition, jealousy, and betrayal. And that's where her secret list began. Number 1. R.J. Molina. To anyone who knows the swamps of Louisiana, the name R.J. Molina carries weight. He wasn't just another gator hunter, he was a living legend. A 4-time world arm wrestling champion, a man with strength that could intimidate just about anyone, and one of the most respected Native American hunters on the show. Fans saw him as powerful, disciplined, and almost untouchable. And for Pickle Wheat, who grew up admiring the older generation of hunters, RJ was someone she respected deeply. She admired his confidence, the way he moved through the bayou like he owned it, and the way he passed on tradition to his son, J. Paul. To Pickle, RJ embodied everything she loved about the swamp: family, honor, and skill. She thought he was the kind of man who could never let her down. But as the seasons went on, whispers started to reach her. Whispers about RJ's fiery temper, about fights that didn't make it to camera, and about a pride that sometimes went too far. Pickle brushed them off at first. Every hunter had their moments, and the swamp could bring out the worst in anyone. But soon, those whispers turned into headlines. In 2018, RJ and J. Paul made news for all the wrong reasons. What started as a feud with another family turned violent, a road rage incident that spiraled into arrests, mugshots, and felony charges. Suddenly, the men who had once stood as symbols of tradition were facing accusations of assault with a firearm. To the fans, it was shocking. To Pickle, it was devastating. This wasn't the RJ she had looked up to. This wasn't the man who taught the world to respect the swamp. It felt like betrayal, not just of her trust, but of the very culture they all claimed to protect. Pickle believed the swamp was built on honor, on protecting family and legacy, and watching RJ's name dragged through mud for violence and rage made her question everything she thought she knew about him. It got worse when Swamp People itself was thrown into the storm. Producers were forced to make tough calls. RJ and J. Paul disappeared from the show, their once heroic reputations shattered almost overnight. And though Pickle wasn't directly involved, she felt the ripple effects. Fans were angry, critics mocked the show, and the entire cast carried the burden of scandal. To Pickle, it was more than just bad press. It was a personal betrayal. She had once defended RJ when others whispered about his attitude. She had told friends and family that he was the real deal, that he carried the swamp with pride. But the headlines told another story, one she couldn't deny. The man she had once respected had allowed his pride and temper to destroy everything he had built. And what stung most was the silence. RJ never reached out, never explained himself to those who looked up to him, and never gave closure to the people who had stood by his side. For Pickle, that silence was as loud as the headlines. It meant she wasn't important enough to deserve the truth. Over time, the disappointment hardened into resentment. Pickle realized that legends aren't always what they seem, and that heroes in the swamp can fall just as fast as anyone else. RJ had been a role model, someone she thought embodied the honor of the bayou. But to her, he had betrayed that honor. That's why RJ's name sits at the very top of her secret list. Not because she hated him personally, but because the disappointment cut so deeply. For Pickle, R.J. Molina represented the first crack in the idea that the swamp was one big family. He was proof that even the strongest reputations can crumble, and that trust once broken can never fully be repaired. For Pickle Wheat, R.J. wasn't just another hunter. He was the first betrayal. Number 2. Troy Landry. To millions of fans, Troy isn't just a hunter, he is the swamp. The king of the swamp, the man who turned alligator season into primetime television, and the voice that defined swamp people from the very beginning. When Troy spoke, fans listened. When Troy fired his rifle and shouted, "Shoot 'em!" it became a catchphrase known in living rooms across America. For years, he was more than a man. He was a legend. For Pickle Wheat, stepping into that world meant stepping into Troy's shadow. At first, she felt nothing but pride. To be paired with Troy was an honor that most hunters could only dream of. He wasn't just a teammate, he was a mentor, someone who taught her the rhythm of the swamp under the pressure of cameras, producers, and a national audience. The bond between them seemed unshakable. Fans adored the pairing, calling Pickle Troy's right-hand girl, and for a while, she embraced the role. But behind the cameras, the reality was far more complicated. Troy's leadership was absolute. He called the shots where they hunted, how they hunted, even how their storylines played out. Pickle, eager to prove herself, followed at first. But as seasons passed, she began to feel the weight of being under Troy's control. Every mistake she made, no matter how small, was magnified. If a line tangled, if a shot was missed, if a gator slipped the hook, it was on her shoulders. And Troy, with his booming voice and high expectations, never let those moments slide quietly. Pickle respected him, but she also feared disappointing him. That pressure created cracks. She wasn't just trying to survive the swamp anymore, she was trying to survive Troy's expectations. And slowly, admiration began to feel like suffocation. The cameras made it worse. On television, Troy was portrayed as the master, the teacher, the patient guide to his young protege. But Pickle knew the truth. There were days when the patience wore thin, when his temper flared, and when she felt less like a partner and more like an assistant carrying the weight of someone else's legacy. The more popular Troy became, the more invisible she felt. Her skills, her grit, and her background as a born and bred swamp girl often took a backseat to Troy's larger-than-life presence. Over time, that imbalance gnawed at her. Pickle didn't want to just be Troy Landry's sidekick. She wanted to be recognized as her own hunter, carrying her family's legacy in her own right. But Troy's shadow was long, and stepping out of it felt impossible. Whenever she tried to voice her independence, whether suggesting new techniques, different hunting spots, or her own storylines, it often clashed with Troy's vision. He wasn't used to sharing the spotlight, and Pickle wasn't willing to stay quiet forever. The rift deepened off camera too. Contracts, appearances, and money all revolved around Troy. For Pickle, who put in long days on the water, risking her life just like everyone else, the imbalance felt unfair. She watched as Troy remained the face of the swamp, while her own contributions were downplayed as the rookie learning the ropes. That label stung, especially because Pickle wasn't a rookie at all. She had grown up in the swamp, trained by her father and grandfather, long before a camera ever pointed her way. What hurt most, though, wasn't the control or the spotlight. It was the lack of recognition. Pickle wanted Troy to see her not as a sidekick, but as an equal. She wanted his respect, not just his orders. But every season, the gap widened. The more she fought for independence, the more it felt like Troy tightened his grip. And that unspoken tension slowly chipped away at their bond. By the time the rumors started, whispers of whether Pickle would stay on the show, questions about her future with the Landrys, the rift had become undeniable. Fans still saw them as a team, but behind closed doors, Pickle felt the strain of being caught between respect and resentment. She still cared for Troy, still honored him as a mentor, but the weight of his control left scars she couldn't ignore. For Pickle Wheat, Troy Landry became more than just a mentor. He became a reminder of the swamp's harshest truth. Even the people who lift you up can hold you down. She once idolized him as the king of the swamp, but over time, that crown became a shadow she could never escape. And that's why his name sits on her list, not out of hatred, but out of the deep ache of knowing that even those you admire most can also be the ones who keep you from truly becoming yourself. Number 3. Chase Landry. At first glance, Chase and Pickle looked like the perfect match for the swamp. Both were young, energetic, and carried the weight of a family name on their shoulders. Chase, as the son of Troy Landry, was born into the legend destined to carry on the dynasty of the King of the Swamp. Pickle, meanwhile, came from her own powerful legacy, with a grandfather who taught her the old ways and a family line that stretched back generations in Louisiana wetlands. To fans, the two seemed like natural allies, the future of swamp people standing side by side. And for a while, Pickle believed it too. Chase's charm, his quick wit, and his relentless energy made him one of the most entertaining figures in the swamp. He had a wild streak, no doubt, but in the beginning, it felt harmless, even inspiring. His reckless confidence made the long days on the water feel exciting, almost like an adventure rather than hard labor. Pickle respected that fire in him, and for a time, she thought their paths would run in the same direction. But as the years went on, that admiration started to sour. Chase thrived on attention, whether it was from fans, cameras, or even rival hunters. He carried himself like someone who knew the swamp belonged to him, and while it made for good television, it often came at the expense of those around him. To Pickle, that swagger soon turned into arrogance. She wasn't there to be flashy. She wasn't there for headlines or to live off her last name. She was there to prove herself and to honor her family's legacy the hard way, line by line, hook by hook. Behind the cameras, the differences grew sharper. Pickle valued discipline, preparation, and respect for the swamp. Chase, he thrived on chaos. He pushed the limits, took risks others avoided, and lived for the rush of danger. It wasn't long before those differences clashed. Disagreements about hunting spots turned into arguments. Missed opportunities turned into finger-pointing. And what fans didn't see were the moments when Chase's temper boiled over, leaving Pickle to wonder if she could ever truly trust him as a partner. The tension only deepened when the spotlight came into play. Chase, already well known as Troy's son, never had to fight for attention. The cameras loved him, the network promoted him, and fans flocked to his social media. Pickle, on the other hand, had to earn every ounce of respect, not just from viewers, but from fellow hunters who doubted her because of her age and gender. She worked twice as hard, yet still found herself overshadowed by Chase's reputation. And instead of lifting her up, Chase often dismissed her, brushing off her efforts as if she was just the rookie tagging along. What hurt most was that Chase knew the struggle. He had grown up in the swamp, under Troy's shadow, and had fought to prove himself as more than just the king's son. Pickle expected him to understand, to recognize how hard she was fighting to stand on her own name. Instead, he leaned into the rivalry. He treated her not as an equal, but as competition. And in the swamp, competition can turn poisonous fast. There were moments when the rivalry spilled off the water. Rumors swirled of disagreements during production, clashes over storylines, and jealousy over who got the spotlight in key episodes. Pickle wanted respect for her skills. Chase wanted recognition for his legacy. The two visions couldn't coexist peacefully, and every time Chase made a reckless move that endangered the hunt or clashed with producers, Pickle felt the weight of it fall on her shoulders. She wasn't just battling gators anymore. She was battling the chaos of Chase Landry. And then came the final straw: silence. When the criticisms came her way, when fans questioned her place on the show, Pickle expected Chase to step up, to acknowledge that she had earned her spot. But instead, he stayed quiet. He didn't defend her. He didn't back her. He let the whispers grow, and in Pickle's eyes, that silence was worse than any argument. Because silence meant he didn't care enough to stand by her when it mattered most. For Pickle Wheat, Chase Landry wasn't just a fellow hunter. He became the rival she never asked for, the reminder that even those who walk the same path can turn against you when the spotlight burns too bright. He was supposed to be a brother in arms, someone who understood the swamp the way she did. Instead, he became a rival, loud, reckless, and dismissive, leaving her to carry scars that went deeper than any bite from the gators they hunted together. That's why Chase's name made her list. Not out of hatred, but out of the bitter disappointment of realizing that sometimes the people who should understand you best are the very ones who turn into your harshest critics. Number 4. The critics who doubted her. From the very moment Pickle Wheat appeared on Swamp People, she faced something her male castmates never had to: relentless skepticism. To the outside world, she was just a young woman stepping into a swamp world dominated by men. The cameras captured her courage, her sharp aim, her grit on the lines, but the whispers followed her everywhere. She's too young. She's just there for television. She doesn't belong in a man's world. Pickle heard it from strangers online, from fans at events, and sometimes even from hunters standing on the same docks as her. And while the words may not have drawn blood like a gator's teeth, they cut just as deep. At first, Pickle tried to shrug it off. She told herself it was just noise jealousy from outsiders, the kind of talk that comes with being in the spotlight. But as time went on, the doubts began to sting harder. Every missed shot, every tangled line, every slip in the boat was magnified 10 times over. When Troy or Chase made mistakes, they were brushed off as part of the hunt. When Pickle stumbled, the critics pointed to it as proof that she didn't belong. Even worse were the subtle dismissals behind the cameras. While the network praised her as fresh energy, some fellow hunters quietly questioned if she had earned her spot, or if producers had simply cast her for looks and ratings. Pickle, who had grown up running lines with her father and learning the swamp from the time she could walk, knew the truth. She had the bloodline, the skills, and the heart. But proving that truth, day after day, felt like an endless uphill battle. The swamp itself didn't make it easier. Unlike the controlled world of television, gator season is unforgiving. Pickle pulled her weight hauling lines, baiting hooks, and risking her life on every hunt. But still, the critics talked. On social media, faceless commenters ridiculed her. Some said she was just a pretty face. Others dismissed her as a novelty act, someone who would vanish after a season or two. Every insult added weight to her shoulders, pushing her to prove them wrong. But it wasn't only the outsiders. Some hunters within the community treated her with the same skepticism. A nod here, a smirk there, little signs that told her she wasn't fully accepted. They didn't say it outright, but their silence spoke volumes. She was an outsider in their world. Pickle turned that doubt into fuel. Instead of crumbling under the criticism, she doubled down. She learned faster, hunted harder, and refused to let mistakes define her. Every successful catch became her quiet answer to the critics. Every heavy gator she helped haul into the boat was a message. I belong here. I've earned this. But the scars didn't fade easily. For Pickle, the betrayal wasn't just the words themselves, it was the lack of respect. She wanted to be judged for her skills, her heart, and her heritage, not her gender or her age. Yet time and time again, she was reminded that in the swamp, respect wasn't freely given to her the way it was to others. She had to fight for it, tooth and nail, season after season. The hardest part wasn't the strangers online. It was the silence of those who could have defended her. When fans mocked her, when critics dismissed her, she expected her fellow hunters, her so-called swamp family, to step in and say, "She's one of us." Too often, they didn't. Too often, she was left standing alone. And to Pickle, that silence was its own kind of betrayal. That's why the critics, faceless, nameless, but unforgettable, etched themselves onto her list. Because while gators test your strength, it's the voices of people who doubt you that test your spirit. And for Pickle Wheat, those doubts became a constant shadow, one that pushed her to be stronger, but also one that left scars she'll never forget. Number 5. The network behind the show. For Pickle Wheat, the deepest betrayal didn't come from a hunter, or even from a member of the Landry family. It came from outsiders, the people who never cast a line, never risked their lives in the swamp, and never pulled a 600-pound gator into the boat. It came from the network, the very machine that turned her family's traditions into primetime entertainment. When Pickle first joined Swamp People, she believed the show would be a chance to honor her family's legacy. She thought the world would see what her grandfather taught her, how her father raised her, and the pride she carried for Louisiana's bayous. For a moment, she was hopeful. The cameras followed her every move, the producers encouraged her to share her story, and the network promoted her as the next generation of the swamp. On the surface, it looked like a dream come true. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Pickle realized that the network didn't want her real story, they wanted a character. To the audience, she was cast as the young beauty with grit, the rookie who needed guidance from the Landry men. Producers leaned into her looks, her charm, and her status as Troy's protege, shaping her image into something that fit neatly into their scripts. What they didn't highlight were her years of experience, the countless nights she spent running lines with her family long before the cameras ever rolled, or the quiet determination that made her a true hunter in her own right. The editing stung the most. Scenes of her struggling made the final cut, while scenes of her excelling landing shots, outworking the men, solving problems on the fly, were left on the cutting room floor. The story wasn't about who Pickle was, it was about the version the network could sell. She became the rookie, the sidekick, the one learning instead of the one leading. And to Pickle, that wasn't just unfair, it was erasure. Worse still, the network thrived on drama. Disagreements that could have been solved quietly were blown up for the cameras. Tensions were exaggerated. Rivalries were encouraged, because conflict kept viewers watching. For Pickle, it felt like exploitation. The swamp was her home, her family's legacy, but to the producers, it was just content. Her struggles, her fights, even her private pain, became storylines to be packaged and sold. And then there was the money. The gators she pulled in fed her family, but the contracts she signed fed the network. Millions of viewers tuned in each season, sponsors lined up, and executives collected paychecks that dwarfed anything the hunters made. Pickle saw firsthand that those who risked the most in the swamp often earned the least, while the people sitting behind desks, far away from Louisiana, cashed in on their blood and sweat. What cut deepest wasn't just the money, though. It was dignity. Every time an episode aired, Pickle saw a version of herself that didn't feel real. Fans thought they knew her, but they only knew the character producers created. They laughed at the rookie, cheered for the protege, but rarely saw the real woman, the one who had fought tooth and nail to earn her place on the water. Even off camera, the network's grip never loosened. Appearances, interviews, and contracts all ran through them. What she could say, where she could go, and how her story was told, all of it was filtered through outsiders who didn't care about her legacy, only about ratings. To Pickle, it felt like she had traded her independence for a role in someone else's script. The betrayal cut to the core because it wasn't just about her, it was about the swamp itself. The bayou wasn't a stage, it was her family's lifeblood. It was history, tradition, survival. And watching it twisted into a product for outsiders to consume left her feeling used, not celebrated. The network promised to honor the swamp, but in Pickle's eyes, they stripped it of authenticity. That's why the network's name became the final, most painful entry on her private list, because unlike family, who betrayed her out of pride, anger, or rivalry, the network betrayed her for profit. They didn't love her, didn't stand by her, they used her. And in many ways, that hurt worse than anything her fellow hunters could have done. For Pickle Wheat, the network wasn't just a company. It was a machine that reduced her identity to a storyline, her hard work to a gimmick, and her family's legacy to entertainment. It left scars that may never fully heal. So there you have it, the 5 names that left scars Pickle Wheat may never forget. But the swamp stories don't end here. If you want more untold truths from Swamp People, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share this video with fellow fans, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think betrayed Pickle the most? Your voice keeps these stories alive.